Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us at our Valparaiso Solar Energy Workshop. We are so happy that you're here with us this evening. We want to give a special shout out to our partners for this event, the Porter County Career and Technical Center, First Presbyterian Church of Valparaiso, and Ivy Tech Community College of Valparaiso. Thank you so much for all of your partnership and your sponsorship for this event. We're so thankful for that. And I want to take a moment to introduce this evening's speakers. We have Mr. Chris Rohaly, who's the president of GAI Solar. We have Dan Robinson, who is the Indiana Programs Associate with Solar United Neighbors. And from the Future Environmental Council, we have Mr. Jesse Kharbanda and myself. My name is Emily Plunkett. Jesse is our executive director, and I am our manager of outreach. I'm so excited for you to be joining us this evening. Here is a quick run through of what we will be talking about this evening. We're going to start with a brief introduction of solar here in Indiana. We'll then move into solar energy and energy efficiency and technology, project development and financing with Chris. Chris will then toss it over to Dan, who will talk about funding incentives and solar co-ops. Jesse will then talk about state solar public policy. And I will wrap it up with ways you can engage your lawmakers on that state solar policy. Jesse will then wrap us up with some questions and answers. All right, so a few requests for you as participants. We are asking that you mute yourself, that way we can be sure we can hear all of our speakers. If you have any questions as we're discussing this evening, please send those in the chat. If you have any technical difficulties or questions on the technical side of things, you can direct message me. My name is Emily, and given our weather here in Indiana, I do want to encourage you all to stay weather aware. We are having some severe weather coming through this evening, so please be aware of that. We will also be recording this evening and sending out our PowerPoints afterwards for you to refer to. Alrighty. So now I'm going to introduce Rooftop Solar here in Indiana. So there are many reasons why someone might decide to pursue solar energy, whether it's to reduce their carbon footprint or because it's a solid investment, or solar is a low maintenance way of having energy. So there are lots of different ways people might come into pursuing solar energy. And that is really good to hear because there's been a fall in cost and rising installation capacity because of that falling cost. So as you can see in this graph here, the yellow line shows how the cost has fallen the last 10 years. It's fallen very dramatically, especially in those first couple of years. And as that cost has fallen throughout the US, the number of, the amount of wattage produced by solar panels has increased. There have been a lot of great examples here throughout the state of Indiana. One example is Valparaiso University has solar panels on their roof, as well as the Porter County Career and Technical Center. And there's a church as well in South Bend that has solar energy on their roof. So lots of great examples throughout the state of Indiana to reflect that trend of falling cost, which is a big barrier for many people when it comes to solar. So putting it in a statewide context, Indiana still doesn't quite produce as much solar or as much of our energy from solar as we would like. A lot of our energy does come from coal and natural gas. We do have some nuclear energy production as well as wind and other sources like biomass. So solar energy is under 1% of our state's electricity produced. And even less than that is rooftop solar. So that's part of the reason we're having this workshop today, to get the word out to all of you. And this is really good news because up as much as 40% of electricity in the US could be produced by rooftop solar. I just cannot imagine how tremendous that would be to have here in the US. And this is according to the National Renewable Energy Lab. Now I'm going to kick it over to Chris, and he will talk about how solar energy works. Take it away, Chris. And Chris, it looks like you're muted.
Yes, I am muted. Here we go. My apologies, we were testing. Yeah, so thank you to Emily and Jesse for inviting me to participate tonight. As she said, I am the president and co-founder of GAI, Green Alternatives. We were founded, we are in year 15, which is hard to believe. And we're born and raised as a company in Kokomo. But in 2020, we actually outgrew that, expanded, and we now are operating out of a shop in Flora, which puts us half hour closer to Porter County. I wanted to show this. I know Emily talked briefly about solar in Indiana, but we got to watch this process of solar proliferation. 2011 on the left there, that we were already in business 3 years, and there was not a lot in the state. And on the far right, you can see this is all from the Siren Solar website if you want to go look for something current, because this is almost 2 years old now. We don't have much, but it's an awful lot more, and the trend is positive. So let's talk about developing a solar project. And I'm going to talk about 4 basic bullet points as quickly as I can here. So I'm just going to be able to touch on a lot of the main topics. I'll give a brief overview of the solar technology. I'm not going to get deep, but there's some key concepts you need to take away from this. We're going to talk about something that's not really solar, energy efficiency, which that's kind of new for us to talk about in this context, but you'll see why it's extremely important to address. Then we're going to talk briefly about a solar process, the process and timeline for a project typically, and very briefly about funding. So on the technology side, I just want to point out, Emily and I had the good taste to choose the same photograph. And you may recognize me. This picture captures my better side there. So when I say solar technology, what I'm really talking about here, you can pick out like from a textbook where I've highlighted the important keys. The technology is going to, it's as important to consider the architecture of your system as it is the components. Because everything is changing so fast right now. That includes how all the system works together and what functions the systems perform. But what is key in all of them is that the inverter is becoming more and more sophisticated. And now your system's performance and the differentiation between systems and maybe installation companies, that will follow the inverter that's being offered to you and potentially the batteries, much more so than the solar panels, what you think of when you see rooftop solar. And every picture we showed you showed panels, not inverters. So the panels are what draws the eye. The inverters and the rest of the controls are what really differentiates systems. And what's driving change to the inverters, especially what's driving all the importance into the inverters, are that the market adapts remarkably well as our policy landscape and the realities of energy costs change. And we'll look at why. We'll start with a basic grid-tied system. This is the first and most common architecture, and there are not too many pieces to it. There is an array made up of solar panels. There's an inverter, or in many cases, you could have an inverter per panel, so multiple inverters. Those inverters convert the DC from the panels to AC and connect to your utility feed. And at this point, my artistic talents show that all of the circuits in your house, building, church, are coming out of the breaker box, and they are oblivious to what the source of their power is. So it can be all from solar, it can be all from the utility, or it can be a blend depending on how much is available and how much you're using. A hybrid system is grid tied. It's still there in parallel with the utility, but it adds batteries. And then you need special controls to manage the current into and out of the batteries, and a special inverter, a battery backup inverter. And I've drawn this loop around here to show that many recent market introductions combine those two pieces of equipment into a single unit so that the inverter kind of absorbed all of the battery maintenance and management roles, yeah, in some company's product. Now, the important thing here is that you'll see that you've got two sources of power for circuits in your house. Some of them are pulled into a second breaker box here. And if the utility feed goes away, then the battery backup inverter kind of jettisons that. It isolates itself or islands from the grid, and it can support, with batteries as the input, any circuit that's in your secondary panel. It's a little more common now to see some companies offering whole house backup, but for reasons of cost and practicality, this is probably a much better approach to consider as your primary. There's off-grid, which many people say they want when they first contact us. And it's a much cleaner design, as you can see, than the hybrid, which has a lot more stuff going on, but it has the same batteries, charge controller, and inverter. And again, those can be combined into a single piece of hardware. The one thing that I will say is that if you really want to pursue off-grid, it's a whole different animal, and you're probably going to have to change your behavior or spend a ridiculous amount of money. And I can tell you why in 2 words: December and January. There is so little resource, you're going to need to plan your whole system based on months with only 2 hours of effective average sunlight a day. So there are a lot of players in the hybrid inverter game, and all of these also have grid-tied inverters as well. We've got SolarEdge, Generac, Tesla, Outback, and Sonnen are probably the biggest battery and battery inverter companies in the marketplace right now. And when we talk about the rapid evolution of functionality, backup power is assumed because that's really why a lot of us think about batteries in the first place. There's storm season, there's maybe tree online season, and there's a lot of new reasons to give extra thought to energy security. So backup power is a given. That's what the batteries are for. But now there are also just routinely the features of self-consumption, which is going to be extremely important in a post-net metering world. There's EV charging, which can be coordinated by your inverter. And there's smart home management, which involves a much more holistic and all-encompassing approach to dealing with your energy production and consumption in the home, which is why energy efficiency becomes so important. So let's take a look briefly here. This is data from EIA, and the most recent I could find in the amount I searched was from 2015. So take a look here. Midwest is the brown bar, and this is probably where most of you are living, single family detached. It's not this is a house that's not a duplex, so all 4 walls are exterior walls. And on average, that'll be about 11,000 kilowatt hours a year consumed. This is a misleading average because it includes homes that heat with gas as well as homes that heat with all electric. A gas home might use significantly less than that. An all electric home will use significantly more. So just understand what averages mean. Now, that consumption breaks down roughly like this. So you can see that we've got a few things that are monstrously large, some middling, and then everything else is kind of, well, small potatoes. So if you're going to increase your efficiency, you're going to go after these big ones first. And here are like the top 8 from that same source. When you look at this, I've got the EIA link down at the bottom of these pages. So let's take a look at the big ones here. If we just talk about, first of all, the first 2 big users are air conditioning and heat. Air conditioning is at the top because air conditioning is always electric, and heat can be from sources other than electric. So that's why it says heat on average is a smaller load than AC. But you know, if you are an electric heat owner, either a heat pump or a geothermal or electric baseboard, that your heating bills are much higher than cooling bills. So heat is enormous, but in either case, the top two are always going to be managing the temperature difference between the inside of your house and the outside of your house. So since that's 30% or more of utility electricity consumption of every house, that's where you should focus. And that means basically slow down the rate of temperature change, because the inside and outside temperatures want to be equal. It's the efficiency of your house that slows down the process that makes those temperatures equal to each other. So that means sealing air leaks, caulking and weather stripping, and insulation. Those two, they are so cheap compared to other options to fix it. And they make such a big difference. The payback is almost instantaneous. You've got smart thermostats that are like a close second. Manage that. There's no reason to be as diligent about controlling temperature if you're not even in the house for days at a time. Now, the big expense for maybe taking a much bigger bite out of that is going for higher efficiency hardware, going to a newer heat pump, going to two-stage compressors, going to geothermal. But that's the bottom of these lists is where the big expenses come in. Water heater is the next place if you have an electric water heater. And that's another thing, insulation on the heater itself. You can go to a heat pump water heater or on-demand water heater as well. And then the next big on the list is lighting. And if you haven't already switched to LEDs, it's a no-brainer, and again, extremely fast payback. Occupancy controls, some kind of smart control of lights in your house. Those kind of systems are now readily available at home improvement stores, and you can do that as well. It's like, do you nag your children or significant other about leaving lights on when they're never in the room? Or do you just put on a switch that says, if no one walks through here in 15 minutes, I'll turn it back off? You choose what's right for you, but I can suggest that could be good for family relations. I want to leave you with the concept of a negawatt. If you've never heard it, we measure electricity production and usage in megawatts. A negawatt is, it started life as a typo, but this is a hypothetical unit of power for measuring the amount of energy saved due to efficiency. And that's, we can thank Amory Lovins for that one. I recommend strongly you go there to his website, RMI, formerly the Rocky Mountain Institute. All kinds of information about what is possible, inspirational, what people have done, and how they're able to live well without being huge consumers of electricity. You can also have some good information, again, at eia.gov. So that's a little bit on efficiency, and I'll just zip through some of this. Let's talk about project development, a couple of financing options. I am not going to talk about incentives. We're going to let you hang on that one for a little bit, and someone else is going to address that. So in project development, we're really talking about what is the process, what steps, other than just having a lot of people show up with a lot of hardware and build the thing on your property. There's a sales process first, which is among the most unpleasant for the typical solar buyer. There's site selection and sizing, which for some lots, it's not going to be an issue because you're going to be faced with maybe only one choice and only one size. Permitting and interconnection can be a fascinating process. And then there's construction, which there's a couple of pieces to that as well. So in the sales process, some of this is on your homework. You want to do some research. You need to know your consumption, get the last year or maybe 2 years of your bills. The utility does keep that for you if you don't. Pick a technology, try a location or size, and we'll take a look in a minute what I mean by that. And here comes the big stuff. Get comparative quotes. Do not be pressured. Do not let someone into your table who promises not to leave until you sign. And I won't say anymore. And make sure that you know what you're paying, not what your payment is. because this is about what you're buying. It's not about the loan should not be the primary product that you buy. The system and its performance should be. You can also, I say trust but verify. A lot of people will make claims about eliminating your bill 100%. Well, try to double check those numbers. And there's a couple of sites where that is possible. There are also many solar owners who can give you empirical data, and you can go like to sirensolar.org, and there are other listservs and bulletin boards and around the state or country that you can join. And I think that you can ask not salespeople, not people like me, because I do have a vested interest in you eventually buying. Ask other people who have purchased. That's an invaluable source of information. In site selection, you want to make sure that you're actually going to get sun. Trees are surprising in how far they can cast a shadow. It's really hard to judge the height of a tree. And the only way to see, I mean, look on the spot that you're thinking of, try to find pictures of it from various times of year so you can see. You can also, well, there are tools and apps that you can also probably purchase, but you'd have to be pretty serious to buy a tool. The app is less than $10 to take a look at whether or not you've got shading issues, but you can ask me about that offline. The important thing is, without sun shining on the panels, no one can promise you you're going to make any amount of energy. And now from a sizing standpoint, a couple of important things to note here. If you do not work out of the home, this is for a residential building, the profile you will probably see that your sun will come up, obviously is at the highest at noon, which is when you're going to be making the most power from a solar array. And on a cloudless day, you'll have a nice half sine wave for your production. However, your usage is going to be mostly contained under two peaks, one in the morning when everyone wakes up and there's a lot of preparation to get ready to leave for school, for work, for wherever. And then when you come home, turn everything on and start dinner and turn on television, computer, vacuum cleaner, whatever. So those spikes do not correspond with the most production. If you're trying to minimize what you have to push to the utility, then what you want is a system that doesn't necessarily make a tremendously excess amount of power relative to your typical usage. Here's a really crude timeline of how things could happen. At the end of the sales process is project development. And so that ends with a contract and a down payment, which for most solar companies, they're not going to have everything in stock. So long lead items will have to be ordered from that down payment. And almost immediately, we would have to file for a permit and interconnection. That will require some information from you as well. So be prepared with whatever documents they need from you, because that can slow this. The part of the process that is the utilities does tend to be variable in time and always takes longer than you think it should. If you have an HOA, this is a voluntary, because not everyone lives somewhere where there's an HOA. If you do, you should probably start that process before signing a contract. Otherwise, it could wind up really disappointing you. And that's, I know I saw Laura Arnold online, but there's, we can talk about HOA state law after this. It's much better than it was. It is not a low amount of effort required on your part. Once we have approvals, then the company, your installer will schedule the crew to show up on site. They will begin in construction. Usually for residential, it can be, as quickly as all same day. It can be up to 2-3 days, depending on the complexity. We have had some really complex, very difficult rooftops, very difficult electrical systems to tie into that took well over 3 days, but typically it'll be in the 1 to 3. From there, once it's complete, an inspection usually is required. The utility always has to be notified. And then sometimes after they are notified, then they will come out and change the meter, after which you are authorized to turn that system on. Financing, there's only one main thing that I want to consider. Cash purchases, if you don't have to pay finance charges of any sort, the return on your investment is higher. That kind of goes without saying. But a lot of times financing is the only practical way for you to afford. So if you can get a home equity loan, something from your bank based on the equity in your home, that will usually be your most economical choice. There are places like the Clean Energy Credit Union that also have very reasonable and rational loans. There are many finance companies that will do solar specific loans, and I want to talk to you about those because those are the ones, the type of loan that certain people tend to misrepresent on social media advertising. You know, it's still a loan. It's not free. There is nothing free. I'm not going to give you anything free. I don't think anyone with something of value will give it to you free. However, you will have, from the time of your contract signing or system completion, probably 60 days in this specific loan with no payment required. However, interest is accruing, so be aware of that. Then you have a minimum payment for the first X months, and this time it was up until month 18, at which point, if you have not made a balloon payment that is the equivalent of your tax credit, your payment will go up. If you make a balloon payment of the amount of your tax credit, your payment stays the same. If you pay more than that, you can lower your payment. This tends to be forgotten and sometimes it's underemphasized. It's a very complicated loan, so just be aware of the financing if you're going to go for something more creatively designed like this. And so far, all I've done is throw a lot of concepts up there that I hope will make you think of many questions, and maybe we can get to those at the end. All right. So just to start, feel free to ask questions later.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was very informative. Next, we're going to hear from Dan. He's going to talk more about financing. So Dan, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Emily and Jesse, for having me this evening. I'm just going to share my screen here. Can everybody see that? Can you see that, Emily?
Yes, you're good.
All right, great. As Emily said, I am Dan Robinson. I am the Indiana Program Associate for Solar United Neighbors. Very happy to be here. I'm grateful to HEC for inviting me to speak. I'm going to talk about financial incentives and rooftop solar because they are going, but not gone yet. Here we go. Solar United Neighbors, we're a vendor-neutral national 501c3 nonprofit. We've been operating in the state of Indiana since 2019. I've had a team here working, and we help people go solar, join together, and fight for their energy rights. So we help people go solar practically through our solar co-ops, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. And then we also bring people together and help them advocate for good solar policy at the state and national level. I had to chuckle when Chris was going through his slides because there's a couple of them that I had as well. This one actually has that inset from 2021, but you can see the growth in rooftop solar in Indiana, as he mentioned. 2011, the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission expanded net metering. So that's when rooftop solar started to grow even more at that point. I'll talk about net metering a little bit more in just a bit. In 2017, the state legislature passed an anti-rooftop solar bill, SCA 309, which started to put some caps as well as deadlines on solar. And one of those first deadlines was in 2017. Since then, rooftop has taken off, and we have another deadline coming up for July 1st, which again, I'll talk about with net metering as well. So the financial incentives, first off, state property tax exclusion, as well as the federal investment tax credit, state net metering policy for the 5 large utilities, and Sun Solar Co-ops. Just a quick word about the state property tax exemption. When you get a solar system by law, your property, the value of your home will not increase for property tax purposes. Most local officials know this, and you won't see your property taxes go up. But if they do, there is a state form that you can file to make sure that that doesn't happen. Next, let's talk a little bit about the federal investment tax credit. Now, this is a tax credit. It comes directly off your taxes and not off a deduction off your income. So it's a big deal. It's 26%. You get the tax credit of 26% of the purchase price of your solar system. That's for this year in 2022. It goes down to 22% next year, 2023. And for residential systems in 2024, it disappears completely. Now, that's the way the schedule reads now. According to the Solar Energy Industries Association, the residential and commercial solar investment tax credit has helped the U.S. solar industry grow by more than 10,000%. So it's had a big impact as a financial incentive. Now, all this is barring any action from Congress. We at Sun, along with some national partners, are advocating for a couple things with the investment tax credit. An extension of the tax credit, which has happened before. Congress has chosen to extend it before. Raising the tax credit to 30%, which is what it used to be, but also making the tax credit refundable. Right now, if you don't pay enough taxes in the first year you claim it to get all your credit back, you can roll that over multiple years. However, making it refundable means that all the tax credit would be paid back to you in the first year, whether or not you pay that much in taxes. This would make it much more possible for low and moderate income households to go solar. Now, an even better idea would be to make it a direct pay option where people could get the tax credit right when they pay for the system rather than waiting until tax time. So that's the federal investment tax credit. So this is my version of the layout of the solar array that Chris had earlier. But as Chris mentioned, the panels on the roof produce DC, direct current electricity from the panels, from the solar panels, send it to the inverter, which converts it to AC electricity, which sends it to your box that gets used up by your home or your business. And then whatever you don't use at that moment gets sent out through the bi-directional meter that the utility installs, and it gets sent out to the grid, where it's used by your neighbors, by folks down the street. Now, right now with net metering in place, what happens is for every excess kilowatt hour you send out to the grid, the bi-directional meter and the utility keeps track of that. Then at the end of the month, it gets trued up with all the kilowatt hours that you use from the grid going to your home. So for every kilowatt hour you send out to the grid, you get 1 kilowatt hour taken off your bill, a free 1-for-1 retail credit trade on that excess generation. This is done on a monthly basis. And then if you still have extra kilowatt hours on your credit at the end of that month that you didn't need for that month, those get rolled over to the next month. Now, this only applies to the 5 large utilities: CenterPoint, Duke, AES Indiana, AEP, and then of course the Northwest Indiana, NIPSCO. Rural electric member cooperatives and municipally owned utilities have their own crediting system that's going to vary from utility to utility. Again, I had to chuckle when I saw Chris with this diagram. So he already talked through what this is representing: solar production, maybe not always at the time that you need it. What net metering does, it lets you store up the credit of that solar production, whether it's in the middle of the day when you're not home, or even if you produce extra in the summertime when the sun is high in the sky and you want to save up that credit for other parts of the year when your system isn't producing as much. Net metering allows you to do that. So what's going on with net metering? Net metering for new systems, installation of new systems, ends on July 1st. Now, this gets a little, somebody asked a question in the chat box about Duke Energy and what the deadlines for this are. And this gets a little complicated because it's going to vary from utility to utility. For example, with NIPSCO, if you go to their website, they're going to say, if you get your application in to connect to the grid for your system before July 1st, you're going to have until December 31st to get it installed. But Duke is going to have a different answer. AEP is going to have another answer. So it's kind of a complicated process, and maybe we can go into that a little more detail in Q&A if you want. What we're telling people with Solar United Neighbors is you want your system up and running by July 1st, because that is what the law requires. The utilities, for good or for ill, are saying, yeah, we can give you a little fudge time to do that. The problem with that is they don't have to do that. And I'm always trying to be on the conservative side. to say that things, they can change. So for example, initially, NIPSCO said that people had a year to install their system after they put in their application. So in theory, if you applied on June 30th, you could have until the following June 30th to get your system installed. But they changed that recently, and now they're saying at the end of 2022. So I always tell people, if on the conservative side, you want to have your system up and ready for them to switch out the meter before July 1st. Now, whenever net metering goes away, whether it's for new systems after July 1st or for when net metering, the grandfathering of net metering for systems that are being installed now runs out. That could be in 2032 or it could be in 2047, whenever you had your system installed. It's replaced by the EDG tariff. This means that your excess credit, your excess kilowatt hours are only going to be credited at 125% of the wholesale rate that the utilities pay for electricity, which is a much lower rate than the retail rate. That's what the law says, and that's what's going to happen. Now, what the law doesn't say is what the utilities are trying to do. The utilities are trying to change how they measure that excess generation. So for these next few slides, I want to thank Ben Inskeep, who used to work with EQ Research, when he developed these, and he's now with Citizens Action here in Indiana. He generously shared these slides with us. So by law, according to state statute, the way that your electricity is supposed to be measured is you have the meter that measures how much from the utility is going to the DG customer, the distributed generation customer, the solar owner. And then it also measures how much is going from the solar owner to the utility. And then at the end of the billing period, which is the monthly billing period, you match those two totals up. You take off all the kilowatt hours that you sent out, credit for that. And then if you have any more left over, instead of rolling over to the next month at a retail rate for credit, you get that EDG tariff, 125% of wholesale. That's the way the law reads. That's the way that many of us are saying this is the way it needs to proceed. What the utilities are arguing is that they're trying to get what they call instantaneous netting, what we're calling no netting, because it is no netting. They're ignoring the electricity that they send to you, and that the meter, they are keeping track of how much electricity you send out to the grid, and they are instantly crediting you for all that electricity at the 125% of wholesale value, not what is left over at the end of the month after covering what you use, the customer used. Now this, as you might guess, has a huge impact on the financial attractiveness of the system. This bar graph shows the reduction in value, financial value of that electricity in the system. So for NIPSCO, there's an 81% reduction in that net worth, what those EDG credits are worth versus net metering credits at the retail rate for residential customers. So what that means is how that practically plays out is, and it greatly extends the payback on a solar system. So you'll see the net metering and retail credit number of years at that rate that you get payback on your system. So right now, if you get your system installed with net metering and retail credits, in NIPSCO, it'll take you 11 years to get your system paid for, the money that you're saving on your electrical bill. Most systems are guaranteed for about 25 years for the production warranty. So you've got 14 years after that of electricity you're generating for free and that you're saving money on. But with no netting that the utilities want, and with the EDG credit that the law requires, that's going to greatly extend that payback period, more than doubling it to 27 years on average, is estimate for with NIPSCO. So that means that your warranty will have run out and you're still trying to save up enough money to pay for that system. So it takes away the financial incentive of purchasing a rooftop solar system. So what now? Well, right now, CenterPoint in Southern Indiana had their instantaneous no netting method approved along with their EDG rate by the IURC. NIPSCO has also applied for that no netting method along with some of the other large utilities. Solar United Neighbors, Indiana DG, Citizens Action Coalition, and a number of other groups have come together and tried to challenge that ruling for no netting in the appeals court. And the appeals court agreed with our position, and it sent that decision on no netting back to be reconsidered by the IURC. CenterPoint has appealed that decision, and so that decision now is at the Indiana State Supreme Court. We're trying to figure out, we're waiting to see what the court decides to do with it. They decide to hear it, what if they don't hear it, what they decide to do with it then. So that's kind of where things are with that. So there's going to be has been a lot of advocacy around in the state legislature around these issues. One issue in the future is we want to make sure that the state legislature doesn't pass a law that allows the utilities to do instantaneous or no netting. And we also want to, at some point, want to try to bring back net metering. Nevada got rid of net metering as a state, and enough people raised a hullabaloo that they eventually brought it back. So we know that that's possible. And then, of course, at the national level, we're advocating for an extension and expansion of the ITC. Real quick with our solar co-ops, the last financial incentive. These are simply geographic regional groups that people that come together to purchase a solar system to get a great deal on a solar system. We've run 2 of them in the 3-county area around Lake Michigan in Northwest Indiana. Just closed out one of them just recently to try to give everybody a chance to get in on net metering. It's free to join a co-op, free to get a design and quote from the co-op installer. We are installer neutral. We run a competitive bid process where we gather all that bid information. We share that information with the members of the co-op who volunteered to be on the installer selection committee. They make a decision about what installer they want for the co-op. On average, you're going to see about a 15% savings on the purchase of a solar system. As I said, our co-ops now are closed for new members because we're trying to get everything wrapped up before the end of net metering, but we hope to open a couple more at some different points around the state in this coming year. So if you want to do one in your area, let us know. We are always looking for local partners to do that. So thank you again. I'm Dan Robinson, Solar United Neighbors of Indiana. There is our website, and our email address is inteam@solarunitedneighbors.org. And thanks everybody for being here this evening. And I'll be around for the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dan, for sharing all of that. Now we're going to kick it over to Jesse, and he's going to share about state public policy.
Hey, thanks so much, Emily, for organizing this. Thank you to all of our attendees, and thank you to Dan and to Chris for your very informative presentations. I'm going to briskly go over the topic of how do we make rooftop solar more accessible and affordable on a broader statewide scale. So thus far, you heard from Chris about rooftop solar technology and also how your solar system can be built and funded. And Dan went into some depth about both the federal tax credit as well as net metering. The question now is, how can we make rooftop solar a reality across Indiana, particularly with the phase out of the federal tax credit and the phase out of net metering? And the answer is public policy. And good public policy that's designed well, can strengthen the job situation in our state and make solar more accessible and affordable to everyday Hoosiers. So a few notes about jobs. One of the fastest growing professions in America is, in fact, those who are in rooftop solar installation, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The number of people that are going to be in the rooftop solar industry could be around 900,000 within a little bit more than a decade and a half. Unfortunately, Indiana does not rank in the top 10 in rooftop solar in America in terms of jobs, nor do we in the realm of energy efficiency. And part of that is because of public policy. So let's talk about some public policies that we hope you will talk to your lawmakers about. So once again, Dan covered federal tax credits and net metering. What I want to do is just very briefly give an overview of 3 public policies that we'd like to see adopted in Indiana. One is called third-party community solar. The second is third-party financing. And the third is called commercial PACE financing. So let's give a setup for each of these. Let's say that you own a home, but your roof is old and you don't want to invest in a new rooftop, so therefore it's really not a good option to put on rooftop solar. Or perhaps you have some cash flow issues, or perhaps you live in a community that has a very onerous homeowners association covenant that it will take years to try to get approval to go solar that way. Well, this is where community solar could really make sense. And what is community solar? It's this notion that a developer puts together a solar farm, maybe on a property that is not too far from, say, an apartment building or a set of businesses, and people subscribe and buy shares in this community solar farm, and they get credited on their electricity bill to the extent that they are buying blocks of solar from this community solar farm. This type of concept is not, there are some pilot projects for community solar in Indiana that are administered by utilities, but third-party entities, the kind of companies like the one that Chris runs, are not allowed to get into this business of third-party community solar. And some of the key beneficiaries, as I alluded to, are commercial tenants, people who want to go solar. Maybe they have a green-minded business, they're in a big building, the owner of the building doesn't want to go solar, so this is a means for them to do it. Or perhaps you are an apartment dweller and the landlord doesn't want to go solar for the building. Well, here's a pathway for you to go solar. About 40 states have community solar pilot projects in America, and about half of those states have legislation that sets up the architecture for third-party providers to get involved in community solar. Just in the interest of time, I'm just going to go to the next public policy option, and the motivation here is one of financing, that perhaps again you're running to an issue where you don't have the cash to invest in rooftop solar, to buy a solar system yourself, or you don't want to take out another loan to pursue or refinance your mortgage to pursue solar. Well, the option here would be something called third-party financing. There are two basic categories of third-party financing. One is called solar leasing, where you're paying a monthly fee to a solar developer to buy whatever electrons get generated out of the solar panels that are put on your rooftop because of this third-party developer. Or the other option is called a power purchase agreement, where you're paying on a kilowatt hour basis to a third-party developer for any electrons that come from those solar panels. These two types of public policies exist in a number of states in America, as you see from this map. And the type of people that tend to use third-party solar include municipalities, small businesses, and homes. In fact, in New Jersey, this is the dominant way by which people go solar from a householder perspective. And in Colorado, this is the dominant way that commercial companies go solar, through third-party financing. Unfortunately, like third-party community solar, this is not allowed in Indiana. The third public policy to be aware of is called commercial PACE financing. And here, once again, the motivation may be you don't want to go down the route of putting up a bunch of cash to put up solar, or you don't want to take a loan. The other motivation for this type of public policy is a logistical one, which is perhaps you hold a property where you want to make an investment in rooftop solar and energy efficiency, but you don't know how long you're going to hold on to that property. So commercial PACE solves those different issues. The basic idea is that the state legislature enacts authorizing legislation, counties adopt an ordinance, they administer a PACE program that might span a county or span a couple of counties if it's done in coordination with other counties, and then they provide a mechanism by which a property owner, generally a small business or a medium-sized business, can invest in rooftop solar or energy efficiency, and they pay it as a line item on their property tax bill. It's a loan that essentially travels with the property, not with the property owner. And Indiana is unfortunately the only state in the industrial Midwest that does not have commercial PACE authorization. That's something we're seeking lawmakers to change in Indiana. So to summarize here, and again, I'm rushing through this just for the sake of time, is that we hope that you'll take the opportunity to talk to your state representative and your state senator and ask them to support legislation that would enable third-party solar financing, third-party community solar, and commercial PACE financing. I'll stop there and happy to take questions in the Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jesse. Now we're going to transition and take, all of those public policy options that Jesse shared and talk about how we can engage our lawmakers. Jesse, if you could stop sharing your screen, that would be great. I will then share mine. Great. Awesome. And as I've been saying in the chat, please feel free to share your questions there. We will have some time for question and answers at the end. And we would love to see those questions come in. So please keep those coming. All right, so we've heard about how solar energy, how the process for pursuing solar energy works. We've heard about funding options and public policy at the state level that we can pursue. Now we're going to hear about, or now I'm going to talk about how we can engage our state lawmakers. So why is it important to engage our lawmakers? It's important in order to make rooftop solar an accessible option for all Hoosiers. Building that relationship with your lawmaker is the key to helping to further some of these public policies we've discussed this evening. So I'm going to share a couple steps that you can take yourselves in order to build this relationship with your lawmakers, or to build relationships with your lawmakers and to advocate for public policy. So the first is identify, figure out who those lawmakers are in the first place for where you are in the state of Indiana. Second is to work on building that relationship with those lawmakers now that you know who they are. Next, you're going to track some of the legislation that's moving through our legislative process. Usually this happens early in the year. This year it ran from January to about mid-March. Next year it'll be a little bit longer. And then finally, you're going to amplify your voice. You're going to get others involved and share about these issues with others in your community. All right, so first, identify, figuring out who your lawmakers are in the first place. A great resource to do for this, or to access for this, is our bit.ly, which is bit.ly.com/inlegis. This is where you can access the Indiana General Assembly website. Here you can type in your address, and this will show you who your lawmakers are, both on the state level and at the federal level. You can then, save their phone number, save their email, as well as access pieces of legislation that they supported or sponsored this past session. I do want to point out that this year is kind of a special year when it comes to redistricting. In 2020, we did have the census, and as a result, all local, state, and federal maps were redrawn. So who represents you now may not be who represents you next year. So I just want to make you aware of that. More information about the redistricting process and how you can find who your new, or what district you are in, can be found at the Indiana Senate Republicans website. And I can share that afterwards. All right, so since we're focusing on Valparaiso, I do want to share who the lawmakers are for Valparaiso. They are Senator Ed Charbonneau. He represents the 5th district. And here is the representative is Representative Ed Soliday. He represents the 4th district. And I have their phone numbers and their emails up here. Of course, you're going to get this PowerPoint later, but feel free to take a picture. All right, so now that you've identified who your lawmakers are, the next step is to build a relationship with them. We encourage you to try to have a one-on-one meeting with them, whether that's virtually over Zoom, like we're talking this evening, or it's in person at the State House, or at Meet Your Legislator events that happen throughout the state throughout the year. And we do want to encourage you to focus on the relationship, not necessarily the policy outcome you're seeking from the lawmaker. We want you to get to know them, get to know what they care about, what motivates them. This is also a chance for them to understand what you care about and what motivates you as one of their constituents. We encourage you to prepare for the meeting, come with some clear messages and questions that you have for the lawmaker. Make sure you have some notes ready. And we also encourage you to remember that they are people too. We want you to be both assertive and respectful when talking with lawmakers, respectful of them sharing their time with you. And we also encourage you to send a follow-up message to them, thanking them for their time once again, and sending a one-page summary of what you discussed during the meeting. Of course, if you're able to meet with your lawmakers, we'd love to hear how those meetings go. We do have a dedicated email set up for this. It's energy@hucweb.org. Let us know what you hear from your lawmakers. All right, so after you identified your lawmakers, you're working on building that relationship. Another important step to take is to track the legislation that's moving through the legislative process. So like I mentioned earlier, the legislative session begins in January and runs through early spring. It depends on the year based on whether or not it's a budgeting year. Next year will be, so it'll run a little bit longer than it ran this year. A couple of resources to share for you to access legislation. The first is the IGA website. This can be found again using that bit.ly link I shared earlier. You can find all of the legislation that's moving through the legislative process, not just legislation having to do with the environment or rooftop solar. So that's all of the legislation. For a more condensed view on specifically rooftop solar or solar energy bills, you can visit our Bill Watch page. I have it linked here for Bill Watch 2022. That is still up if you want to check out any of the 6 pieces of rooftop solar legislation that moved through this session. I believe that was a record, so we're very excited about that. And one of those did become law, having to do with HOA solar. I think we had some questions about that popping in through the chat. So that's one resource I want to point out to you. Another is our weekly e-news and social media. So every week during the legislative session, we'll send out some calls to action. Quite a few of those every session have to do with solar energy and rooftop solar. These include specific calls to action that you can take and ways you can engage your lawmakers. So if you're looking for ways to get involved and to continue building that relationship, these are some great resources. We're also on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We're not yet on TikTok, haven't ventured there yet. But if you're looking for some more up-to-date information, that is also a great place to look. All right, so you built that relationship. You're working on identifying who those lawmakers are, all of that good stuff. You're tracking legislation. Now you're going to amplify your voice, go a little bit further. So we encourage you to write letters to the editor, to your local newspapers on topics that you care about, like rooftop solar energy. Here we have some great tips on how you can write this letter to the editor. The first is take time to understand your newspaper's submission rules. So I did some quick searching ahead of this meeting this evening. The Northwest Indiana Times does have some specific steps that they encourage you to take in submitting your letter to the editor. Be sure you're following those to make it easy for them to share your letter. Second, we encourage you to inspire others with a call to action. So you want to empower the readers, not just talk about the issues, but give them actionable ways that they can make a difference. That really draws people in. Another tip that we want to share is personalizing your letter with a story. So similar to building a connection with your lawmaker, having something you care about infused in this letter will make it more compelling. And last, we want you to share your success. Share your success with the community. If you're able to get your letter published, share it with us as well. We'd love to hear about any letters to the editor that you share. All right, and as Jesse said, we do have a couple calls to action for this upcoming legislative session. We want you to encourage your state representative and your state senator to look into third-party financing for solar, third-party community solar, as well as commercial PACE financing. And lastly, I want to close with my email and my phone number up here. If you need help in reaching out to your lawmaker, if you're wondering about strategy or how to best connect with them, please feel free to contact me. I'd be delighted to help you out. All righty, I'm going to stop sharing. And now we're going to move into the question and answer portion moderated by Jesse.
Thanks so much, Emily. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us for this webinar, and grateful again for the expertise of Chris and Dan and Emily. So we're going to dive into the Q&A, and we're pretty much on schedule here with about half an hour to field your questions. And several came in through Eventbrite. So I'm going to start with that and start with a question for Chris, which is simply, how does a prospective solar owner determine if their property is a good fit, has feasibility for going solar?
That is a really good question. There are some simple tricks we use. When someone calls us up, the first thing we do is ask for address. We'll look at a satellite image on Google Map or any Bing map you choose. And there are some very clear signs. One, if you can't see your house, you're probably not a good site, unless you're planning on something, you have a yard that is exposed, that would be a space for something mounted on the ground. Secondly, if it is something that has to go on a house, and the roof does have a nice view to the southern sky, look for the age of your roof. We have taken in the last few months 2 systems off of roofs because roofs were leaky. And in both of those cases, it was after a discussion with the homeowner when we put the system on, it's like, this is your roof really should be updated before we put this on. So over the life of a system, even though the new roof is expensive, not doing it before you put the system on, it doesn't make your site not viable, but it definitely adds to the life cycle cost of that solar, and it will eat up the uninstall, reinstall, eats up a lot of the energy savings that you've gained. Lastly, you'll need to know structurally if it's going on your roof, that it can take it. More and more permitting agencies and locations are requiring structural engineering stamps prior to issuing permit. And then obviously some of the things that make a site less feasible have nothing to do with the technical description, but everything to do with zoning, permitting, homeowners association, and, well, agreement on what is an appropriate location between spouses. So those are all very important things to consider.
Thanks very much, Chris. And the next question I'll pose to Dan, and that is related to this issue of solar installers. Of course, we have tremendous confidence in Chris and his company and his team, but how does a company, say the co-ops that you help to facilitate, Dan, go about assessing worthy installers to consider?
Well, what we do is we contact as many installers that are, especially local ones, that are working in the state of Indiana, and ask them to submit a bid. And those bids are going to cover things you typically would expect: price, different types of equipment and the cost of those, the types of inverters they offer, batteries, cost for those, but also information about their warranties, information about the service, the record that they have, the number of installs they've done. And we even gather information about their workforce. Is it a diverse workforce? Do they, how many women do they have employed by the organization? You know, all kinds of different things. And then we share that information with the members of the co-op who are on the installer selection committee. But before we do that, we also get references, 3 references from each of the companies, and we'll call those and try to check on those. And then we'll also do things like check Better Business Bureau to see if they have it ready for that, and other consumer watchdog kinds of groups to see if there's any issues with those companies. Most of the time, the companies that we have worked with in the co-ops are ones that we have some history with, and if nothing else, through multiple bids, even if they haven't been chosen by a co-op, members of the co-op. So we do have some history with those. So all that kind of goes together as we evaluate those. And again, we're vendor neutral in the sense that we don't favor any one company, but we want to make sure that the companies that are submitting bids, that we have the information that shows that they are good companies to work with. And so far, we've had a pretty good track record.
Really good, really good. Thanks, Dan. Next question would be back to Chris, and this really gets to the issue of timeline. And I know you had a very valuable slide in your presentation, which of course we'll share shortly after this webinar. But Gina asked about this question of really, how do you pull it all off to take advantage of the federal tax credit at its peak, and furthermore, if possible, to take advantage of net metering? What, if you could sketch out a little bit further, how do you pull off getting things done and maximizing those incentives?
I'm going to say that answer becomes more complicated every day. What we're seeing is I'm tired of this word. Over the last 3 years, I think I've heard this word way too much, but we're seeing an unprecedented level of calls, of requests for proposals, site assessments, and workloads are extremely high. And then unfortunately, we've got this perfect storm then of with policy changing, workloads being extremely high, now we have this carryover pandemic-induced supply chain issue globally. And there's stuff that we used to be able to just walk into Menards and buy a trunk load full. And now we're waiting weeks and weeks for some of the simplest parts. So it's really difficult to, at this point, for an installer, any installer, to make a commitment to have you installed before the end of July. That being the case, I guess to maximize that, you probably check a couple of installers and see if they even have confidence, if they're still taking any inquiries. I've come across several that just they're too busy. They can't even think about making further commitments at this point. There are some that are still have some bandwidth, and many others like me where there's a lot of fog that I can't see through. But I think within a couple of weeks, I'll be able to safely say we're done, right? So that's kind of a non-answer, and I apologize, but that's kind of reflective of the current state of affairs.
Thanks for your candor there, Chris. Next question we'll pose to Dan, and it gets to this issue of cost. If you could kind of give us a flavor, hopefully from thinking about the different co-ops that you facilitated, what are we talking about as the average cost of these solar systems for a home or for a small business or for a church?
That's a great question. I wish I could give a definitive answer, but it's really hard because, and I see Chris kind of smiling there, because it's really depends on your setup at your house and what your electricity needs are and how much of your electricity you want to cover. So for example, if you want to cover 100% of your use, then you really need to look at buying, on average, the average size of a residential system in Indiana is going to be in that 6 to 8 kilowatt range, I think. And so if you've got, it's not unheard of in our co-ops to get anywhere from $2.50 to $3, $2.50 to $2.75 per watt. So you take $2.50, let's say it's $2.50 per watt for ease of math, for 1 kilowatt. So you take that times 1,000. So that'd be $2,500 for 1 kilowatt. And if you got a 6 kilowatt system, then now you're looking at about $15,000. But it depends on the kind of panels you get, and it depends on how much the installation is there anything special with that. And if you get a ground mount, then there's a cost of running the electric lines to your home from the ground. So there's a lot, and if your battery just jacks that up even more. So there's a lot of variables in there. And if it's $3, then you're looking at, more like for a 6 kilowatt system, you're looking at more like $18,000. And then a lot of systems are going to run in around 10 kilowatts. So it just sort of depends. One thing I will say, though, about the whole question about net metering makes a difference when it comes to excess generation. If you use up all your generation at the house, you're in a sense getting retail credit for that because you're displacing the retail electricity payments you'd have to make from the grid. So it makes financial sense, even when net metering goes away, to purchase a system that maybe doesn't provide 100% of your electricity. Maybe it only provides 50% of your electricity. Sure, there's still going to be moments when you're producing excess generation that you're sending out to the grid, but they're going to be a lot less. And you're going to get a lot better financial return on that system if you don't go for 100% post-net metering. So I don't want people to think that if they don't make net metering, then rooftop solar doesn't make any sense at all, because it still can, depending on how you size your system. And then the other piece of that, which is what I was trying to emphasize during the presentation, is if we don't have no netting, if we just have the EDG tariff on that excess generation, and it's trued up at the end of the month, you're looking at lengthening the payback period on a system maybe 4 or 5 years. I mean, that's a wild estimate, but it's not as huge an impact as it would be if we had the no netting. So that's why it's important that we try to make sure that doesn't happen. So I hope that helps a little bit. Chris probably has better information about the pricing than I do, but that's, yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Dan. And next question I'll pose to Chris. Interesting one from Glenn, which is, does having a backup generator give you an economic head start as far as going solar?
Well, that is interesting. So the answer is yes or no. So if you're putting in a standard grid tied system, as just the basic, no backup energy storage or anything, then it's really the one potential advantage it could give you is an easier place for your installer to make his connection. So that connection could go in the transfer switch. And generally that can be, in most cases, an easier thing to do with less material and time from the electrician than having to go into your house into the breaker box. However, if you're adding storage, it could give you a head start because the storage could be used in most cases, and your generator, rather than something that runs every time you lose power, could only be run in those cases where you lose power for an extended period of time. What that would do is it would minimize the requirements on your battery capacity. So the battery could be, a strategy for brief power outages, which most of the ones for our neighborhood are. And then you wouldn't have to worry about, that it would give you a leg up on, you'd be able to buy less. Kind of the same theory as Dan's, I think, well thought out approach to system sizing after net metering.
Thank you, Chris. Next question is from Bobby, asking about how do hailstorms affect rooftop solar panels?
Would you like me to address that?
That'd be great, Chris. And
Okay.
feel free to weigh in as well if you'd like.
Yeah. It's one of our favorite questions. You can go to YouTube and search solar panel hailstorm test. If your panels are UL listed, which if you're going to actually have a utility interconnection done properly, which you will, your panel is UL listed. The UL listing only comes after that panel has passed a hail test, which is a test that simulates a perpendicular or orthogonal impact of a hailstone on the face of the panel at, I don't know it in metric anymore, 55 miles per hour, 1 inch diameter hailstone. So the bottom line is most hailstorms, small to moderate sized hailstones, won't do any damage. There are hailstones big enough that it will do damage. However, we know one of the systems we've had to uninstall was after a hailstorm destroyed all of the shingles on the roof around the array. The array was never touched. We had to take it down so that the roofers could replace the shingles. So it is pretty rough stuff once it gets up there.
Thank you, Chris. Dan, did you want to comment? Or if not, we can move on to the next question.
No, that's fine. I was just going to tell the same story Chris told about having the panels for hail damage to the roof. So yeah.
Right. Great. Let's see. Next here would be maybe to talk about this whole issue, Chris, of submitting 12 months worth of data. Could you explain the rationale for that?
It's not so much a submission of the data. It is a review for yourself personally and for your installer. Your installer will want to know, for proper system sizing, your consumption over a 12-month period. And the reason that the full year is available is that, as you saw in the efficiency discussion, your consumption is heavily weather dependent and ambient light dependent. So every month it's a different number, and you need to look at a full year truly if you're going to do a thoughtful design or get a thoughtful design.
Great, Chris. Staying with you on another front, you know, a lot of people who have attended our workshops are homeowners who, you know, are again thinking about putting solar on their homes, but we do have congregations that join our workshops as well. And I guess I would be curious to hear from you, Chris, about special permitting considerations on the part of congregations or community centers or that want to go solar.
So believe it or not, we have not ever seen any differences in permitting for installing for faith communities or what's the word? Government community buildings. Sorry, municipal. Thank you. So from a permitting standpoint, the building inspectors and building departments are really focused on the structure more so than the use. And as long as there are going to be people in it, the rules are the same. So those codes are pretty uniform. I think that the only differences that we see are more economical, because any not-for-profit does not have a tax burden and generally can't benefit from the tax credit then. And so, and that's maybe an issue that Dan can address more so than. So technically, though, there isn't really a big difference.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here and say that that's one of the reasons that we are advocating for some changes in the investment tax credit at the federal level to try to make it refundable or even a direct pay to nonprofit organizations so that they can take advantage of that tax credit, which they can't do right now.
Great, thank you, Chris and Dan. Next question I'll pose to Dan, which is when you think about the different solar co-ops that, again, Sun has facilitated, what stands out to you among these folks who are kind of thinking through the process of going solar? What have they found to be the most daunting element of the whole process of going from considering solar to actually getting it installed? What element of the project development process is most intimidating?
Well, I'm a little biased in this, in that when we talk to people about the co-ops, they say how much the co-ops save them the big hurdle. Because I think for a lot of people, it's like, okay, I see all these ads on Facebook, I get these phone calls, people stopping by and putting flyers in my door. I don't know anything about these companies. I've heard this company was okay, but then someone else said it wasn't good. So I think that that's the biggest hurdle, is trying to figure out which company to go with, because there's some great companies out there. There's not some, like any industry, there's some that are not so good. And so what the co-ops, I think, give people a peace of mind is that these are companies that have been vetted, that we've had some history in dealing with almost all the time. But we've done some background checks and Better Business Bureau and reference calls and that kind of stuff. And we've looked at the equipment. We know the equipment is quality that they're trying to sell. So I think that's the biggest hurdle that they've run into. The other one, though, that I think, again, I think the co-op helps with, but I would encourage people, even outside of a co-op, is to speak up. A lot of times, I mean, installers, like I said, the installers we work with are great, but they're people too, and they're human organizations, and every human organization is going to make a mistake here and there. And so sometimes communication isn't the best. The co-op, in my role, I'm a consumer advocate. People can come to me and say, hey, something didn't seem quite right with this install, or something didn't seem quite right in the communication. I can go to the installer and say, you know, how do we fix this? Or is that what you meant to say? Or is that what you said? And can we put the two parties together? I've done that a few times with some of the co-ops. But even outside of a co-op, I really would encourage people that if they have concerns, to speak up respectfully, because again, you may not have the full story. They may not have told you, oh, we got to deal with this permit in this way, so we got to do this thing. But or sometimes they made a mistake and they just didn't realize it. So it's that communication, I think, is it can also be a big hurdle, and that's another place that the co-ops can help with that.
All right, thanks so much, Dan. Going back to Chris, I want to ask about the issue of rooftop versus ground mounted. So first of all, what's the noticeable technical differences between those two types of systems? And B, what considerations may lead someone to go with a ground mounted system over a rooftop system?
Okay, so technically, the biggest difference is clearly mechanical. A building mounted array leans heavily on the structural integrity that's already in the building. And so we need to attach to that, but we don't have to duplicate it. So there's attachment, and as long as we do the analysis that shows that your structure can accommodate the weight, then it's fine to proceed. With a ground mount, there has to be more structure because it has to withstand the prevailing winds. So in our area, it's 90 miles an hour. I think in most of Porter County, it's the same unless you're really close to the lake shore, and then the wind ratings have to go up. So it's more robust, and therefore there's more material, and more material usually means more money. So the hardware itself will cost a little more, typically. But what we've started seeing some parity there, because everything on the roof is almost exclusively aluminum. Everything on the ground, because it needs strength, a lot of it is galvanized steel. So since aluminum is so much more expensive per piece or per unit of volume, that difference has kind of faded as aluminum prices have gone up. But the other key technical difference is, production. If I use the same panels in a rooftop system versus a ground mount system, there are two things that will affect production. One is orientation, and two is temperature. So anybody who has ever had the displeasure of having to work on your roof in the summer in the day knows how hot it gets up there. And you may or may not know that there is something called there's a temperature derating curve for a solar panel that we lose like a percent of output for every couple of degrees C of average operating temperature. So literally, if I put into our software simulation tool a system on the roof and then move it on the ground and say it's on the ground, I get 6 to 7% more output annually, which is significant. The second thing I can do on the ground that I don't have the flexibility to do on the roof is maybe change the direction the panels are facing or change the tilt. I can't move my house after it's built. I can't move my barn, and I can't change the roof angle. So it can give you an advantage there. I'm going to say 1/3 advantage too, especially in systems that rely on the solar for battery charging and backup functionality. And that is, after a winter snow or a very dusty harvest season, I can get at those panels and maintain them and make sure that they're clean and producing. So from a serviceability standpoint, there are certain times and certain locations where you'll want those on the ground if at all possible. So that's what we see.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Chris. We only have about 3 or 4 minutes left, and we definitely want folks to continue to take this opportunity to learn from our very special experts here. So please drop something into the chat if you'd like to ask a last-minute question. I'll pose a question that I think both Chris and Dan, I think, can both speak to, and that has to do with this issue of financing. Let me ask this to you first, Dan, if you have any strong preferences about what stands out as kind of the most compelling method of financing these systems.
Well, I thought Chris had a great point about a home equity loan. I know of people, this isn't common, but it happens, where they took out a home equity loan, and so if you look at two expenses, your electric bill and your mortgage payment. If you took the old mortgage payment and the old electric bill and you combine those, and then if you take the new mortgage payment, which is going to be higher with the home equity loan, and the new electric bill, which is going to be lower, because of the solar panels. Sometimes you end up saving money right at the get-go with a home equity loan. Now, again, I don't want to make people think that it's a shoo-in that's going to happen for them, but it is possible. So I think in terms of financing, that makes a lot of sense if you're able to arrange that. And can I just say real quick, while I got the floor, somebody asked a question about HOAs in the new law. I posted a link to the Solar United Neighbors page about the new law and the process for going through that with your HOA, if that's the route you want to go to use that new law to get your panels. So just that'll be there if anybody wants that. And or if you see the recording of this, just go to Solar United Neighbors Indiana, and there'll be a link to learn the issues HOA in the page. So sorry about that.
Thank you for flagging that, Dan. That's really, really helpful for people to get educated on the new solar homeowners association law. I'll pose that question quickly to you, Chris. Again, preferences on financing options.
I like everything Dan just said. So there is definitely value in a no money down loan in certain situations, but it is fraught with risk. For one thing, it's the psychology. It makes it very easy to overspend. The other thing that is really kind of transparent with those loans is that many of the companies who rely on them for their sales process, after they accumulate a few systems that are financed, they sell those loans. They bundle them as a financial product and they sell them on the finance market. And so having recently myself personally experienced identity theft, it was invaluable to me to walk into my bank and sit down across a desk from someone who could fix my problem. And if that's who finances my solar array, then I feel confident when there's a problem or some complication with payments. And if this is a loan that is, from a company who has sold it to a company who has sold it, I may never be able to address any anomalies or complications that may happen over the 20+ year life of that financing. So I am very heavy on being able to make eye contact with someone when it comes to an issue as weighty as financing a big amount.
Great. Thank you, Chris. That will have to be the last question to our experts. So thanks so much, Chris Rohaly and Dan Robinson, for your excellent insights. And I'll turn this over to Emily Plunkett, our Manager of Outreach, to wrap things up.
Jesse, thank you once again to all of our speakers, you included, Jesse. So thankful for your time this evening. Also, thank you to all of our attendees. Thank you so much for being here this evening and hearing from our lovely speakers. I also want to thank one more time our amazing sponsors, the Porter County Career and Technical Center, First Presbyterian Church of Valparaiso, and Ivy Tech Community College, Valparaiso campus. Thank you so much for your support and for being here this evening. You will receive a follow-up email since you all signed up through Eventbrite. That will include the recording from this evening, as well as the PowerPoints and some of the links that we mentioned as well. So keep an eye out for those. Those will be coming sometime before the end of the week. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email me. My email is eplunkett, Plunkett, @hecweb.org. I'd be happy to answer those. Thank you so much. Hope everyone has a great evening.
Thanks a lot, Emily. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.